Welcome everyone to another observability clinic, Log Observability with Dynatrace. This today is an introduction session to Dynatrace Grail and DQL, the Dynatrace Query Language. I am particularly highlighting here November 2022 because I know there's a lot of stuff coming and we will have more sessions planned. I am not the expert on log analytics and log observability, but my colleagues are. This is why I invited both Josh and Michal. Josh, can you quickly introduce yourself, who you are?
Yeah, hey folks, glad to be back. Josh Lange, Ace Architect on the services end.
Awesome. And we did a session prior to this already on the previous capabilities of log analytics. Now we learn a lot new about Grail, which brings me to Michal, who actually is leading the team that is actually implementing all this. Michal, could you introduce yourself quickly to the team?
Sure. Thanks, Andy. Hello, everyone. My name is Michal Franczak. I'm Principal Product Manager responsible for log monitoring and Dynatrace. And today I'm happy to tell you a bit more about the future.
Awesome. So in October, we announced Grail to the world, but really Grail is important to understand what it is, but more important it is what the use cases are it enables. And therefore, Josh, I know you've prepared a lot of things for us. Please take it away and enlighten us what we need to know about log observability with Dynatrace.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Andy. So let's start off with what do we plan to learn today? We're going to take a look at what problems are we solving? What is Dynatrace Grail? The new logs and event viewer, an intro to the Dynatrace Query Language, and then we're going to do some actual hands-on working with DQL. Then we'll have Michal come in and do some what are we working on now, kind of what's coming into the future in our roadmap a bit with some additional use cases presented by him. All right, so let's start it right off, right? In terms of what we are solving, this is observability for logs without metrics. So just a quick preview of what some of the capabilities that DQL brings into the picture, giving us the ability to put some, data directly on dashboards, as well as, being able to grab that data directly from your log content. So there's no indexes, no schema. This is just the DQL, the power of it, bringing it to, your observability data. All right, so how does this all start? Well, Grail is the new storage backend for the Dynatrace platform. It's not just a new database solution. It is going to be the first purpose-built observability database. Okay. In addition to that, Dynatrace will add context by analyzing dependencies and storing relations inside of Grail. This is built and optimized for our AI, Davis, right? Processing billions of dependencies in the blink of an eye. We're addressing today's challenges of big data and cloud everywhere. Grail is going to be limitless, highly scalable, cost-effective, and super fast, right? So we're pretty excited about it. This is going to also unify our backend for all observability data, right? This is the Grail data model. Data types we're going to call records, metrics, logs, traces, events, topology, metadata, and many more, right? Each of these each of these types of records can exist on their own, but let's have a look at maybe a single log record, right? Natively, we have a timestamp, some topology information. We can also pull some metrics out of there. Some of these data points have commonality, like metrics are tied to hosts. Maybe they're tied to logs, traces are tied to trace IDs, etc. Grail becomes the single source of truth. It is the unified storage for all observability data in the Dynatrace platform, right? So then we have a question about how can this commonality in immutability and context be exploited? The answer to that is the Dynatrace Query Language. So the DQL is a powerful tool to explore data across many different patterns. We're going to explore the new log and events viewer today. Of course, we have the simple mode where we can just select quick attributes from the standard stuff we've been used to, the things we did, Andy, before on log v2. Now we're bringing in the ability to get a little bit more complex with it and have some additional features when we actually start utilizing the syntax and producing the data that we're looking for. Right? It offers maximum flexibility because it's built on processing an arbitrary event data. There's no upfront description of the input data schema, contrary to relational databases like SQL tables. Right? One of the key things to understand about the Dynatrace query language is we have to chain commands with the pipe operator. So large queries become diced into smaller queries, and this allows us to be very fast and quick in returning the data. So anytime that we start building out our queries, you're going to use the pipe to kind of chain these different commands together, right? So initially, we're going to learn how we're going to fetch logs today, right? Then we're going to look at fields and filters and the ability to do calculations and summaries and all that good stuff today. But it starts with understanding that as you build your queries, you're chaining things together to ultimately get to a result, okay? Let's take a look at what we do with loading data, right? So fetch, right? Fetch logs. And then from there, we can pipe in, okay, I want to filter for only show me the events that contain an error, right? Maybe I want to total that up to be a summarize and show me the single count or a single value of all records in my environment that contain the log level of error, right? So it's a very simple query. We would just say fetch logs, pipe it to a filter, pipe that to a summary, and that ultimately gets us our singular value, okay? Now, of course, there's going to be many, many more commands inside of DQL. We're not going to go through necessarily every single one of these today, but this is really just the beginning of what DQL can expose. We also have many functions, so not just commands, but also functions, the ability to be, very simple with the query language, or you can also solve very complex use cases that your environment may have, right? So, with that, we're going to jump right into the product and start off with some example queries and some use cases. How's that sound, Andy?
That sounds really cool. And I'm fascinated because I have to be honest, I'm not a log analytics expert at all. But what I've taken away so far from you is that any type of log data that Dynatrace is ingesting through the ways we've ingested before. But now the difference is to, I would say, traditional approaches is that you don't need to think about what you want to do with the log data upfront when you ingest, but you can really express any type of query and to really get in the data in a very fast manner, because the way we also structured, the way we store the data, but also the way we structured DQL. I really like DQL and the way you explained it, that we basically, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you're fetching a bucket of data, then you pipe it into the next expression, which can filter it down, add fields, remove fields, calculate things, and I guess you can chain as many as you want, which means can I filter, can I do some calculations and then filter again, and then is this all possible?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And one of the best parts about how Grail allows us to, utilize DQL is that it doesn't change the ingest side, right? So this is just a storage backend change for the Dynatrace platform. All of the ways you collect log information today, all of your traces, all of your, the entire environment that you have never changes. So the same things apply. So the way you're collecting log information today is going to be the same way you're going to collect log information when it comes to Grail. It's just going to be a UI change, a backend storage change, and that gives us the capability to utilize DQL.
Really nice. Yeah,
awesome.
Show me some examples, because right now I've only seen PowerPoints. I want to see some live demo.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we even get into more of the advanced side or the DQL side, of course, we still have the same familiar screen that we saw before. This has been in the product for some time now. We have the capability to just quickly say, all right, maybe I want to filter by a particular log level here. Let's say, show me all errors, right? And then I'll rerun the query, and I'm going to get some results that come through. Once you have the results in front of you, of course, we can start to scan through. This is going to be sorted by timestamp. If I make a selection on something, now we have contextual information related to this particular record, right? For certain records that are captured from our backend traces, we'll have drill downs we'll see a little bit later. I can directly create metrics from here, processing rules, right? I have the links into all of my topology information, the attributes that we're extracting from this particular log file. So there's a lot of good detail that's going to be captured on every single line that you select, right? And of course, the attributes and the things that you can select from, you can continue to build out a very simplistic query. But here today, we're going to focus on this advanced mode side, right? So I'm going to switch over to the advanced mode, and that brings us into the DQL syntax, right? And I'm just going to start from scratch, and we're going to look at a use case of the status of errors, right? The log level of our content. And I want to first fetch some logs. So I'm just going to type fetch logs. Okay. I can run that simple query and get a complete list of results, right? This is everything in my environment. Right now, I'm not specifying any time frame. So DQL is inheriting the global time frame selector. Now, of course, if I wanted to use the syntax and specify time, I could just say something like, I want to do from now to the last 1 hour. Okay. And then rerun that. It is now accepting only the from and the time frame that I'm specifying inside the query versus the global time frame selector. So if I were to change this to today, my query is not going to actually change even if I rerun this, because it's assuming just the 1 hour here. Okay. So that's an important note about the time frame change. Even though it gives me a pop-up here, it's going to always use the syntax versus the global time frame. But it's something that we can simply omit for the use case we have right now, right? So the next thing is I want to learn what are all of the statuses that I have inside the environment, right? I don't necessarily need to filter to one right now, but I want to learn what is all of our different log levels that we have. So let's just say I want a pipe, right? I've first collected a bucket of information. Now I want to, transform that information in some way. So here we're going to use a quick summarize to count the number of events by the status. So let's start with a summarize. And DQL is giving me suggestions as I go ahead and type through the syntax, so it makes it very easy. Here I want to do a count function, which is going to supply the number of records, and then I'm just going to simply say by, and here I can just type in status. Okay, so if I rerun that query, everything in my environment is, I've got info, none, warn, and error, right? So I don't have any severe or debug and stuff like that, but I could find out what is actually being pulled in. So a very simple query that changes from reading individual records to actually grouping that together in some type of way, transforming that and producing some values. This could, of course, if I wanted to, pin that to a dashboard, save this as something that could be regularly produced if this was important to me, right? But we're going to take this a step further. So let's say, what if I wanted to get a percentage of the number of error records compared to the total number of records in my environment, right? So I actually want to do some calculation here, right? So what I'm going to do is change the query just a little bit. And the first thing I want to do is actually generate a total variable, right? So I can, rather than just saying I want to summarize the count by status, I can create some variables here. I'm going to say total is equal to the count. Oops. Okay. And that's going to give me my total count. Then I want my error total variable to be a count if, right? Now I can use a function here and say only count if the status is equal to my error. Okay, this is case sensitive here, so we're going to use uppercase error. And at this point, I don't really have anything to run the query on. If I rerun this right now, it's going to give me these differences, but the goal is to calculate a percentage here. So now I can see, okay, yes, I have 6,200 records out of the 4.8 million, but here I can do one more thing, and that's called a fields add, right? So I want to bring in another field to what I currently have here. So we're going to do another pipe. We're going to say fields add. Okay, that's a command here. And this is going to be our error percent. Okay. All right. And that's going to be equal to, we're going to take the variables I created in the summarize, and this has got to be converted to a double. So we're going to do 2 double as a function. And then we're going to take my error total. Okay. And then we're going to do our calculation here, multiply by 100 and divide by our total variable and close that off. And here I should end up with a percentage. Now this is in decimal format, but this is actually, 0.12% of the value here. So the calculation is taking how many error records did I have versus my total. So a relatively rather simple use case, but the power of this is showing how we can actually do calculations and bring additional information into the mix, right? I didn't have to create a metric to do this. I didn't have to go generate some type of processing pipeline to ensure that I'm only counting the error records and then building a metric to do my calculations later. I can do that directly in the query, which is pretty cool. The other cool thing about it, and this is across the entire DQL data, all log analytic information as we're in the logs and events viewer, is now I'm only looking at 2 hours of information here. Let's say, my manager came to me and said, can you produce this calculation for the last, 24 hours? It's not something that I had before. So typically prior to Grail and its capabilities, I would have to ensure that the metrics I wanted to create are created now, and then I could only see the data going forward. Now I can actually go in the past, right? Just have our query language analyze the historical data and produce the same result. So I could change my time frame here to something like the last 6 hours, rerun the query, and I'm going to get a different result, and it does that calculation right on the fly.
So Josh, just from my understanding, again, I consider that I'm not an expert in all of this, but in previous approaches that other tools are using, it would mean I would need to reanalyze all the data, like rehydrate, I think. Is this what it's called? Like
yeah,
right. So that means if you said, hey, from now on, I want to have the error percentage calculated, that's great for the data that comes in from that time when you define that metric. But now you have the option here, very super fast, to just execute the same query against any type of data, also data like historical data, where you never at that point thought about that you need to answer this question.
Right. No, you're absolutely right.
That's cool.
Awesome. All right, so let's get back to just our couple of hours of data here. And, so that's kind of one use case. And again, of course, let's say I want to pin that to my dashboard. I want to just create a table here. Or if I wanted a single value, then I could also remove some certain things. So if I didn't want the actual error total and the total values to be present, I suppose that I could just do another pipe and just say, the only fields that I'm interested in here is the error percent. And that should just give me my single result. And if I wanted that to be something like this, okay, here's my percentage of, and I pin that to a dashboard, start building out the view that I'm interested in. You can really change up exactly how you want to present the data and do your calculations right in there. All right, cool. Let's jump back, grab all of our logs again. And this time, I know that there is a particular service that I have in this environment, and it's called the cart service. So I want to find all log content from a particular container name or any of these attributes that we see. So when we first fetch logs, these columns represent the attributes that we can extract from, or if I make a selection on an actual entry, I could scan through here, find topology information, all of the attributes. These are filterable attributes, right? So let's work with an additional filter in this case. So we're going to pipe to a filter. And here we're going to do filter to our container name. So I want to look for Kate's container.name. And that's going to be equal to my carts service. Okay. And then let's go ahead and run that and see what we get.
So also just that I understand, every log message, every log entry that we've ingested, we've automatically enriched with all of the topology data that we have in Dynatrace. Does this belong to a host? Does it belong to a process? And with the topology data with Smartscape, we can then also execute queries and say, hey, give me the logs from this particular service. And it doesn't matter where the service instances were running. I just want to have the log files. And so is this also possible? I can query data and say, give me stuff from pieces of my architecture where I know the dependency information from?
No, absolutely. So all of the same attributes. So if it's a particular process or any of the components in Kubernetes, look for a deployment, focus on the log source, right? I have not only just the understanding that, okay, this entry comes from this particular source, I could, look at the topology and say, okay, I know that I'm only interested in all content from a particular Kubernetes cluster, right? Regardless of namespace, regardless of deployment or component of my application, just focus on something at a higher level hierarchy, right? And all of that's a filterable attribute, something that you can use in any of the components or commands that we take a look at today.
Cool.
Okay. Awesome. All right, so I want to build on this a little bit further. If we kind of scan through, let's clear out that, kind of scan through these entries here. One of the things that I notice is, of course, I've got some valuable attributes, right? User ID looks interesting. I've also got this cart async that, or this add item async that records not just a user, but also I see things like a product ID and a quantity, right? So now this information is interesting to me. I assume that the add item async, or I know in this case that, okay, for every item this user adds to a cart, we're going to record a product ID and we're going to record the total quantity of that product that a user has added to their cart. So maybe my use case becomes, can you show me, or can DQL show me all totals of all products by ID and the total quantity that has been added for that particular product in a given time frame, and then I could massage the data even further if I wanted to, but that's a use case we're going to take a look at right now. So because we know that the information we're interested in is add item async and it contains product ID, I'm just going to focus on anything that matches the phrase of my add item async. So we're going to add an additional filter in this case, add matches phrase. So the function that I want to use here is matches phrase. Oops. That's going to simply say, look for the content of my log record, and then my add item async. Okay. Go ahead and run that. And there we go. Right, so that makes sure that I'm only focusing on the records that I'm interested in. And of course, as you're building out your queries, if you're not interested in certain columns, just use that fields command I showed before, where I could say I'm only really interested in right now the timestamp and the content, right? Just so I can review, get a little bit of a bigger information. It's easier for me to view and look at. And we can clearly see that we've got a lot of different product IDs. We've got a lot of different quantities. So let's go ahead and start doing some calculations on that.
Are you telling me you can just parse on the fly content?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
That's awesome.
So I don't have to have a rule and tell Dynatrace upon ingestion, I'm interested in product ID, right? I mean, this log content, Dynatrace doesn't know that product ID is important to me. So it's not creating an attribute automatically, but I'm able to query that with my own syntax and just go ahead and build out a view and do that on demand, right? So those use cases where, I have to report on some type of value, have to organize this information for a troubleshooting exercise, for a business use case, whatever it may be, I can do that on demand, and I can go back to any historical data that I have captured or retained. So in order to do some parsing here, right? This is where we get a little bit more complex. Now, this is going to use the parse command, but the syntax of this is the Dynatrace pattern language. Okay, so that already exists in the product today without Grail and without the log and event viewer that we see here, without DQL, but that's on the processing side. So that's on the ingest side. So that's already been in the product, but we can now bring that into the context of an on-demand, as we were saying, directly in our query. So here, what I want to do is look for my content field. Okay. And then I'm going to start using some of the pattern language components. And the first one is LD, which represents line data, is going to look for, let's say I want to bring in user ID as well. So here I just have to specify single quotes user ID. I'm going to match that exact record. Okay. User ID equals. And then after the parser finds that field or that component, I'm going to go ahead and just say that I want to also line data that to a variable called user. Okay. And then we're going to separate this with a comma. And then we're going to go ahead and say, all right, I've got space. Okay. And then the next one, I can then specify, I'm just separating from, okay, a user ID captured that with line data user. So I'm taking the field or the value of the user ID into a new attribute or a new variable. And then I have a comma here. So I need to specify, okay, there's a space between product ID. And now I can go ahead and say my product ID is the next thing that I want to capture. Okay. Equals, and then we're going to line data that as well out to product ID. Okay. And okay. All right. And then we'll finally do the same thing for the quantity here. So just to make this a little bit quicker, just going to copy the rest of this command, and then we'll take a look at the explanation of exactly what's going on here. Okay. So let's just make sure my syntax is exactly right before I showcase that. Right. All right. So now, essentially what we're saying is I just want the user ID, I want the product ID, and I want the quantity, right? So the format here, of course, line data specifies I'm getting rid of I'm just telling the parsing engine that there is some data at this location I'm not interested in, get up to this point where you're matching user ID, and then go ahead and take that into a new variable. And then we're just specifying our space, and then of course our product and our quantity as well. Okay. So now, in order to get, if I go ahead and run this, right, I will get a new column, product ID, quantity, and user. But now I'm only interested in, let's say, we can remove this information, the timestamp, and we can do some calculations around this. Okay, so at this point, we're going to say we want to look for fields, and I'm interested in user, product ID, and quantity. Okay, and then at this point, I want to summarize or group the data together. So we're going to summarize. And here we're going to create a variable. So total product ads is equal to a sum. And then we're going to convert our quantity to a long. So to long. I'm going to say quantity. Okay. And then we're going to just simply say by product ID. Let's see what we get. All of that was done on demand with no other configuration other than writing a query, right? And in the last 2 hours, for my particular product ID here, I have 11,000 product ads, right? It could change time frame and continue, going on with that. And, as we dive further into all the commands and the ability to change up this data, I could even likely do some conversion on some of my product IDs and make them friendly, or build out my table to put on a dashboard in the same manner that we've done before, right? If I wanted to filter to a particular product ID, of course, that I can modify my filter to look for that. But I just did parsing on the fly, and then a calculation of all of that information based on a record that I was interested in. Yeah.
Quick question. First of all, thank you so much again. For somebody like me that is not into the weeds of log analytics every day, it's great to learn, and especially like it the way you explain it step by step with the pipe operators and what we can do to filter, parse. The parsing is interesting. So LD stands for line
Data.
Line data.
Yep.
And I know I looked a little bit into the documentation. We also support other type of content. I think JSON is supported, and some other parsing options.
Yeah, so I've actually got a JSON example, and I'm not going to build this one out step by step. This doesn't even actually take data that I have in the environment. This is just going to be a simple example of here's some JSON content that I have, and here's how I could parse through it. So let's take a look at this query here, and I'll show you, kind of some of the ways that I'm grabbing some of this information. So I'm basically creating a new field. I'm specifying and telling DQL, hey, this is a field called fields to parse, and this is the data I want to represent in it. So it's just some, JSON information with some nested values, some arrays, And now I can start parsing that out. So in order to parse JSON, I'm just going to say, okay, I want to parse this variable, which contains this data, which could be my content field in any other record, right? And then I want to take my JSON information and transform that to a string. And then I can start adding new fields with the names of the fields that I would like. And then I just use JSON string and then reference the indexes associated to the values I'm interested in, right?
Oh.
And that can produce things like, okay, what is the nested value? What is the first array, the last array? And that can do calculations on the sum. So just some cool stuff here, right? And the folks that are watching this video, you can take a look at that for some examples of how you could access, some really cool JSON data.
Yeah, I feel that I probably want to have you back later on to maybe let's do an advanced session just on DQL to go into some advanced use cases. But I think this is perfect for showing us in general the power of DQL. So where do you get the data from? Fetch logs, time frame, then you can filter it. I like this as well, where you can even specify the value of a field just for, I guess, for exploratory purposes and how this works, just inline here in the query. That's awesome. Yeah.
No, exactly. I mean, you can do a lot of testing on your own. One of the things I recommend to users that are getting comfortable with DQL is that if you're parsing something or if you're calculating something, you're building new fields, just remember the chain of operations, right? Start small, build it out as you go, continue to run, and then look at the results. And as you're building something out, you'll know if something breaks, okay, where did it break? And I can go back and start to, fix that. But cool. So that's what I wanted to introduce from my side on the, intro to DQL. I'm going to pass it over to Michal now. And he's going to give us some additional use cases of some similar queries and how we can do some advanced, cool stuff with some dashboards. So,
yeah, thank you so much, Josh, so far. And Michal, thank you before you get started for all the great stuff that you guys have built here. As I said, I always remind you, I'm not an expert in this, but I see the value in it. And you built a powerful log observability platform here.
Thanks, Andy. And I must tell you that we are also probably as excited as you are and your viewers.
For sure.
So let me bring some more use cases. And in order to do that, let's start with an online shop, because as you know, it can contain multiple microservices working together and logging multiple things, from business-related data to some performance data, like, for instance, how long it takes to load the product detail page. And all of these can be found in logs. With DQL, let me show you some of the examples that we'll get from the logs. Here is a front-end component that basically renders the page. And in the log itself, we can see an attribute that says how long it takes to generate a response. Let's try to get an average response time from an online shop to understand what is really the performance of our application. And as Josh showed you, we can do it with a simple summarize function. But before that, we have to extract something on the fly. And here comes the example of parsing a JSON content, because as you can see, here we have a JSON. In order to do that, we simply use a parse command and we parse our content field and map it to a new field called JSON. And then we have access to all the attributes that you can see listed here in this JSON structure. And then we simply summarize and calculate the average from our JSON, from the HTTP response took milliseconds attribute, and we can even add a nice alias here. When we run the query, we can get the results and visualize it as a single value. Of course, when we build our observability setup, it's very useful to have a dashboard. So obviously you can do that. You can pin it to a new dashboard, give a name to the tile, and simply pin it. When you open the dashboard, you're starting your journey with observability logs.
That's
Here
really
we have
cool.
our new tile, and when we go back, we can jump directly to the query we had in the past and the visualization, because this query is a nice starting point for a more advanced use case, because this is just the average of all the requests. But what if we are interested in a breakdown, like understanding what are the slowest pages in our online shop? So here we can use the buy parameter to do a breakdown of the average response time for all the pages that we have in our online shop. And then when we run the query, in the table result, we can see all the URLs with all the average response time. But maybe what is important for us is actually only the information what are the average response time for the product pages, because that's where the revenue comes from, right? So when we run the query, we can narrow down the analysis with a simple filter function with matches phrase, and of course we can pin it to the previously created dashboard as a table or as a bar chart, depending on our needs. And what is really cool is the fact that we are able to run this query for the entire history of our data. You saw that we didn't know the data format itself. We just parsed it on the fly. We were able to narrow down the analysis to only the pages that were in our interest, and run the aggregates to get the answers from data. That's really cool, because if you compare it to the other tools that are on the market or the classical approach to logs, you would need to create a processing rule to extract the information up front, define your schema, then define your indexes, define your attributes, and then of course you're able to create your new metric and of course visualize it and put it on the dashboard. Of course, with Dynatrace, it's still possible. You can go this route, but here you can, with DQL, you can do all of this without additional configuration.
So Michal, so that I try to rephrase what I've just learned. That means in the traditional approach, you need to specify upfront how to parse the data, what you want to do with the data, and you showed all of the different settings just now in Dynatrace, because we still allow you to do it. But now remind me again, what are the use cases when I would still use the pre-configured rules versus when do I use the ad hoc query?
That's a very good question, Andy. And for that, I prepared. I'm sorry, I broke the recording.
No. You didn't break anything. It's so good. You can just do play from current slide. Yeah, there we go. Perfect.
That's a very good question, Andy. And for that, I prepared a table showing all the differences. So the difference between logs powered by Grail and the classical approach where you use metrics from row, because all the two solutions are valid, right? But there are certain differences. In both scenarios, you are able to visualize the data and pin it to the dashboard. But with logs powered by Grail, you can run the analysis through all the historical data that you stored up to 3 years. But with metrics, you only get the information from the moment the metric is configured and the first data point is captured. So that's the key difference. If you need to do an analysis ad hoc on historical data, you would go with logs and DQL. But if you just collect the information and from the moment you start to capture it, that's also fine, right? Also, with log powered by Grail, we didn't have to configure any log processing up front. We didn't need to know the schema. But with metrics, you have to clearly define what are the attributes that are interesting to you, what is the schema, what are the dimensions, and what are the splits that are necessary. So if your data model is stable and you know what you're looking for in the logs, then go for metrics. But typically, you don't know that upfront. That's why DQL is extremely helpful here.
Yeah, that's thank you so much. This is perfect. I great kind of side by side. When do we use what? So if I have stable logs, if I know I always get this and this is the exact answer that I want, you can go with metrics from logs. Otherwise, logs powered by Grail just gives you so much more flexibility, especially on questions that you didn't know at the time when the data was ingested. You already knew about that. You want to know this. So this is really great.
That's for observability, right? But when you think about all the forensics use cases, when you have all the data formats coming from different services, different audit logs, and so on, when you need to dig deeper in the data, then the ability to parse data on the fly, do the additional filtering, and so on unstructured data is extremely helpful. Here, we are just focusing on the observability itself.
And I think one more thing to add, I mean, you mentioned if your logs are stable, but we all know that if we start to update our libraries, if we start to update from one version of a piece of component to another, you never know. Maybe the log data, maybe the log format is changing, and you don't even know all of these impacts that it has. So with logs powered by Grail, you have no problem at all, because you can always execute the query and adjust it to the data that you have that's coming in. And I think this is really, really nice, especially from a software engineering perspective. If you are, as I said, you're updating your third-party components, or you're just updating a library, and all of a sudden this update is causing the log format to change, right? And we are very flexible here. So that means you're not losing any data. You get all of your answers, and yeah, very powerful.
Exactly. And if you think about the entire migration to the cloud story, when you onboard new services, new software as a service, and then you don't need to worry about making sure you understand all the logs, because you can always do the analysis on the fly and get the answers the moment you need them.
Now, I have one more question to the demo that you did, particularly because you were looking at logs that were produced, I guess, by a web server, by an app server. I always have been with Dynatrace for many years, and I know our value proposition has always been, especially for those use cases, you would use your pure paths, your distributed traces, because the idea is that you're capturing all of your transactions. But I also know, and this is now why it clicked with me, that many of our users out there, they, for whatever reason, maybe cannot instrument their application, but they get log files from their web servers with that detailed information about the URL, the HTTP headers, and the performance. And this is why this is so powerful, because we expand these classical distributed trace-based analysis to any of your apps, as long as your web servers produce the logs. So just want to say, really, really great demo, and something clicked, and that's always good when something clicks.
Yeah, especially that we also support this, clicking, because we are enriching our logs with topology context, with the entire entity model that helps you to understand the connections between your components and the logs that are connected to both infrastructure and applications. Yeah. But I'm pretty sure, Andy, that you and all our viewers are just waiting for the roadmap and wanted to know more what will come in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always happy, because this is always a tricky question when you ask product managers what's coming in the future. So whatever you can share would be very interesting for us.
Yeah. Of course, I prepared a few highlights from the product roadmap. Of course, as you said, I cannot reveal everything, but there are many things that I can already show today. So from the things that we delivered today, we presented the advanced queries with DQL, the ability to pin the visualization to the dashboard, and also query the entire history of your data up to 3 years. But what is coming soon is enhanced user experience for query development in advanced mode. We will work on more auto-suggestion, allow you to select sampling rate and make sure that whenever you run the query, you get the first results really quickly. So even when the query is not finished, you will get your first results. You will be able to stop the query and also analyze how how many data sets were scanned and so on. Furthermore, we are investing in collaboration. We will allow you to save the query, share it with your team in your organization, so that you don't have to write the same query twice.
That's cool.
When it comes to the things that are planned for the future are more visualization, so line chart, pie chart, and distribution chart for logs that help you to understand your data sets. But also we will make sure that the database understands logs better. So without the need to configure metrics or events, we will help you to efficiently troubleshoot your logs. We will show the logs in context of problems, but also thanks to the information about topology, we will show you the logs in the exact context of a time frame or trace or surrounding components. And of course, last but not least, we will enhance the security. So we will provide a coarse-grained permission model on bucket level for logs, but also fine-grained permission model per record, so that in your large teams you will be able to grant different access rights to different group of people. Obviously, all the things in the coming soon require changes in the UI that you saw today, and this is more or less how it's going to look like in the future, where we will introduce the saved query and the history, so that you don't have to write the same query twice. We will allow you to tweak the query with a custom sampling rate. All the auto suggestions will be included in the query editor. All the diagnostics will be visible to you. And yes, all the data will be loaded instantaneously without the need to wait for your query to finish. So that's all I prepared for today. And what can I say? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and I can just repeat again, thank you so much for doing this. I believe, Michal, there's one more slide that is coming afterwards with some resources. Perfect. So folks, I will also post the links of the resources that are highlighted here as part of the description of the video. So if you're watching this on YouTube, then you see it on the bottom. If you're watching this on Dynatrace University, you can even also then download the slides. And I would love to have you back, because I know there's so much more that we can talk about. Josh, obviously, you showed us, you gave us a little intro into DQL, but there's so many more advanced use cases that I would love to maybe see, the best of functions and some advanced queries that people kind of tips and tricks. That would be awesome. And Michal, I would like to have you back as these things that you've just shown us in the roadmap, as they're coming to life. Then we can do another update session. That would be great.
Yeah, absolutely, Andy.
Yeah, awesome. And then last but not least, this is November 2022. Perform 2023 is coming up, which is important to know. So we're back in Vegas, and besides hearing on main stage and in the breakouts on what's happening in Dynatrace and from our customers, Josh, I believe you will be on site as well to deliver hands-on training.
That's right. We'll be doing logs on Grail. So, excellent hands-on training session for anybody to attend. So, get out there, register for Perform.
Yeah, perfect. You'll find everything on the Dynatrace website. Okay, with this, any final words before we part? Anything we missed?
I think I'm good. Thank you again for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah. Dan?
Yes, I think we're good, and thank you so much, and enjoy the new logs in Dynatrace.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
All right. See ya.
Bye.